They didn't tow my boat, they murdered a memory. I walked into my own marina at sunrise and found yellow tape snapping in the wind, an excavator chewing through the mahogany hull of Evelyn's Promise, while a woman with a clipboard barked, "Finish the job." That boat was the last clean line connecting me to my wife. I'm not a man who rattles easily. 30 years in the belly of ships will sand your nerves smooth, but watching splinters of our life bob on the water lit a fuse I didn't know I still carried. The HOA said I owed community fees. Funny thing, I don't live in their community. I own the ground they were standing on, so if they thought paperwork could bulldoze me, they picked the wrong dock and the wrong sailor. This is my story, and by the time we reach the end, you'll see why their little empire collapses piece by forged piece. Before we dive in, tell me your city and local time in the comments, and if you believe no HOA should crush private property, tap subscribe. I used to think silence was peace. The soft slap of water against the dock, the whisper of cedar trees along the shore, that was the quiet I built my life around. But that morning, silence felt like something else. It felt like pressure, the kind that builds in a boiler room before the explosion. 2 days after I watched them tear apart Evelyn's Promise, I received a certified letter stamped with the blue and gold crest of the Eagle Ridge Estates HOA. I didn't live there. My property wasn't even on their parcel map. Still, the envelope carried the kind of bureaucratic arrogance that reeks of perfume and toner. Inside was an itemized invoice that could have been satire if it weren't so real. Unauthorized vessel, $2 500 fine, failure to display community mooring tag, $1 200 non-compliance with modern aesthetic standards, $4 000. Administrative late fees, $3, 500 total, due $11, 200. And beneath that one final sentence, printed in bold, failure to remit payment within 72 hours will result in enforcement action up to and including removal of the offending property. There it was, the smoking gun. They didn't want money. They wanted control. I drove straight to my lawyer's office in town, Maya Brooks' sharp eyes, sharper words. She'd helped me with zoning years ago when I bought the Marina. I laid the letter on her desk. She read it once, twice, then leaned back, the corner of her mouth twisting. "They actually sent this?" she asked, tapping the crest with her pen. "Certified mail," I said. "They even made me sign for it." She sighed. "Classic HOA overreach. They think the lake makes them feudal lords." Maya drafted a cease and desist so sharp it could have cut steel. It cited Oregon Revised Statute 94.63, explicitly limiting HOA authority to member-owned property. The letter demanded a full retraction, a written apology, and threatened litigation for harassment, slander of title, and destruction of property should they proceed. We couriered it that afternoon, signature required, of course. Then I waited. For the next 3 days, I buried myself in work. Rebuilding an old diesel engine in my workshop, organizing bolts by size, anything to keep my hands from shaking when I remembered the sound of splintering wood. Every night I'd catch myself looking at the empty boat slip on the Marina's live camera feed, like staring at a missing tooth in your own smile. Day 4, no reply. Day 5, still silence. Maya told me it was good news. If they're quiet, it means their attorney probably told them to shut up and pray, you go away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Bureaucrats like Brenda Klein, the HOA president, don't back down. They double down. On the 7th day, I drove back to Cedar Cove just to check things myself. The access road cut through a thick wall of pines before opening up to the docks. I smelled the lake before I saw it. Usually that smell was peace to me, diesel, cedar, and brine. That morning it smelled like loss. Halfway down the gravel road, I spotted the yellow tape again, tangled in the brush, flapping like a warning flag. Beyond it, 2 police cruisers idled near the boat ramp. I parked and stepped out. The air was sharp, cold enough to bite. One of the officers, young enough to still have hope in his eyes, held up a hand. "Sir, this area's restricted," he said. "Restricted?" I asked, my voice calm. "That's my marina." He hesitated. "According to our report, this property's under jurisdictional dispute." I laughed. Not loud, just one short, bitter sound. Jurisdictional dispute. "Son, I own this dirt." He looked uncomfortable, glanced toward his partner, an older man, the kind who'd been trained to keep things civil. The older officer approached. "Look, Mr. Mercer, we understand you're upset, but this is considered a civil matter between you and the Homeowners Association. No criminal charges are being pursued." "Civil matter," I pointed toward the empty water where the remains of my wife's boat floated like driftwood. "That's grand theft and destruction of property." He didn't flinch. just repeated the line like it was printed on a cue card. "You'll need to pursue this through your attorney, sir." That's when I realized the system wasn't built for people like me. It was built to protect paperwork. I turned away before I said something that would get me arrested. On the way back to my truck, I saw Hank Doyle, the old fisherman who'd kept his boat 2 slips down from mine, standing by the fence, his hands trembling around a cheap flip phone. "Ray," he said softly, "I'm sorry. I got some of it on video." He handed me the phone. The screen was small, the video shaky, but the sound cut clear. The mechanical roar of an excavator, the sickening crunch of timber, and then her voice. "Make sure you get all of it," Brenda shouted. "Finish the job." My jaw clenched. Hank swallowed. "She showed up with 3 guys, a truck, and that machine. Told us it was an eyesore removal." I thought she had permission." "She didn't," I said. My voice came out quiet level, the kind of quiet that made Hank step back a little. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch with the deeds spread out on the table under the light. The paper was old edges, yellowed, stamped with the official county seal. Mercer Harbor LLC, property line. Full ownership of dock access road and shoreline extending 300 feet east of Maple Creek. It wasn't pride. I felt looking at it. It was fury. Cold, methodical fury. These people thought they could bully me with fines and forged authority because that's what they did to everyone else. They'd confused kindness for weakness. So I made a decision I wouldn't sue them, not yet. A lawsuit would take years and give them exactly what they wanted: delay. No, I was going to end them on my own terms in my own arena. The next morning, I pulled out my old drafting board, spent the entire day studying county GIS maps, zoning codes, and property easements. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. Their claim of extended community covenants was complete fiction. The HOA's legal boundary, filed in 1998, ended 100 feet from the shoreline. Everything beyond that, including the docks, the boat slips, and the access road, was mine. I found something else too, a thin folder buried in the county archive. 15 years ago, the original developer of Eagle Ridge had signed a license agreement allowing residents to use a narrow pedestrian bridge over Maple Creek to access the marina. It wasn't an easement, it wasn't permanent. And most importantly, it could be revoked at any time with 24 hours notice by the property owner. I sat back in my chair and smiled for the first time in a week. They demolished my wife's memory under a fake claim of authority. Tomorrow, I'd cut off their only path to the water, and legally. That night I drafted the letter myself. Effective immediately, the pedestrian access bridge crossing Maple Creek onto Cedar Cove Marina property is revoked. Any entry onto this property without written permission will constitute trespassing under ORS 164.245. Raymond Mercer, owner Mercer Harbor, LLC. Maya reviewed it in the morning, raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about this?" "Oh, I'm sure," I said. "They wanted a war. I'll give them paperwork they can't ignore." She grinned. "Then, let's deliver it with style." We printed 3 copies on thick linen paper, official, undeniable, and had them notarized. That evening, the Eagle Ridge HOA was holding its monthly meeting in the community clubhouse. Open session. I drove over just as the sun was setting, wearing my old Navy jacket, calm as a loaded gun. Inside, Brenda was mid-speech about maintaining lakefront aesthetics. The residents looked bored, half asleep. I walked right up the aisle and set the letter down on the table in front of her. She blinked. "Excuse me, sir, this is a private meeting for residents." "I'm not here as a resident," I said evenly. "I'm here as your landlord." Murmurs rippled through the room. I tapped the document. "As of tomorrow morning, your access to the footbridge and to my marina is terminated. Step foot on it and you'll be trespassing." Brenda's face turned a blotchy red. "You can't do this," she shouted. "I already did," I said, and turned to the audience. "You wanted to know what community standards look like. That's mine. Respect property lines." For a second, no one moved. Then somewhere in the back, someone started clapping. Another joined in, and another. By the time I reached the door, the sound had swelled a slow, deliberate rhythm of people, realizing the tyrant at the front of the room wasn't untouchable anymore. That was the first crack in their empire. The next morning, the mist was thick enough to swallow sound. From my porch, I could barely see the dock lights glowing faintly through it, like ghosts refusing to leave. That silence didn't comfort me anymore. It was the kind of silence you get before a storm. Brenda thought she'd won. To her, I was just an old man nursing nostalgia and a half-rotten marina. She didn't know that while she was sipping coffee behind her wrought iron gate, I was drawing up battle plans. First thing, I met with my old Navy buddy, Eli Tran. He'd done private security work since retiring, sharp mind, steady hands, and a moral compass that pointed true north. When I told him what happened, he didn't ask why. He just said, "How tall you want the fence?" By noon, his truck was idling by the dock, loaded with steel posts and chain link. We started working under a gray sky. The rhythmic clang of the post driver echoed off the water. Each strike felt like punctuation in a sentence I'd waited too long to finish. "Leave a gap here," I told him, pointing to the bridge where HOA residents used to stroll across like they owned the place. "That's where the gate goes." "A gate?" Eli smirked. "You mean a wall." "Call it what you want," I said. "By tomorrow they won't be setting one painted toe on this side." By sunset, we had the fence standing solid, a clean, cold line between my property and theirs. Eli installed a keypad gate, commercial grade, the kind you'd see at a shipyard. Cameras went up next, 4 in total, each one feeding into a cloud account with redundant backups. Brenda could destroy my boat, but she'd never again touch my land without me watching. When Eli packed up, he handed me the remote. "That'll do it. They cross that line, you'll know." "Good," I said. "Next, I'm going after their wallet." He chuckled. "You're smiling again. That's bad news for somebody." That night, I called Maya. She didn't answer at first, probably because she knew I wasn't ready to hear reason. But when she finally picked up, her voice was calm, professional, and just a little amused. "Tell me you didn't build a fence." "I built a fortress," I said, "and now I need you to find me a forensic accountant." There was a pause. "You're going for the financial jugular, always follow the money," I said. "That's where rot hides." 2 days later, I had a small team combing through every HOA financial disclosure, county filing, and public tax document from the last decade. HOAs love to talk about transparency until you actually shine a light through their books. The results were worse than I imagined, not just negligence, theft. They'd been fining residents for non-compliance and visual disturbances for years. Boat covers, too bright lawn chairs, not modern enough, even wind chimes that clashed with the acoustic harmony of the neighborhood. None of these fines appeared in their official budget reports. Instead, they'd funneled the money into a shadow account listed under Community Aesthetics Improvement. Aesthetics, my ass. It was a slush fund. At the center of it was the treasurer, a meek-looking woman named Sandra Pike. She handled the books like a magician handles cards, never letting anyone see the deck. The audit also uncovered a proposal buried deep in the county planning minutes. 6 months prior, the HOA had submitted an application to redevelop the existing Marina property into an exclusive Eagle Ridge clubhouse and spa. There it was, their entire motive printed in bureaucratic black and white. My Marina wasn't an eyesore, it was prime real estate. They planned to run me out, devalue the land with fake fines, and buy it for pennies once I was too exhausted to fight. But they made one fatal mistake. They assumed I didn't know how to read a zoning map. When I told Maya, she actually whistled. "You realize you've got them dead to rights. Extortion, fraud, zoning manipulation. If this goes to court, they'll be dismantled." "Not yet," I said. "Court is their comfort zone. I want this to happen in daylight." She hesitated. "What are you planning?" "Transparency," I said simply. "The one thing bullies can't survive." The next morning, I printed 300 copies of a letter titled "Notice to Residents of Eagle Ridge Estates." The message was simple, polite, but sharp enough to draw blood. "If you or anyone you know has been fined by the HOA for property aesthetic violations related to lake access, please contact me directly. Evidence may be relevant to an ongoing legal inquiry." I signed it, included a burner phone number and a dedicated email, then paid a local teenager $50 and 2 boxes of pizza to deliver them door to door. By nightfall, my phone was melting. Dozens of messages poured in, residents angry, humiliated, and finally emboldened. Photos of bogus fines, copies of canceled checks, even screenshots of Brenda's emails threatening additional enforcement. One woman wrote, "They made my husband repaint our dock because the stain wasn't neighborhood approved. We paid over $2,000. Please tell me we're not crazy." I replied personally to every message. They weren't crazy. They were victims. Within 48 hours, the story spread faster than a lake fire in August. People started asking for meeting minutes, financial disclosures, refund policies. The HOA's inbox, previously used to intimidate, was now a siege engine turned against them. A friend of mine who worked in town IT called to laugh about it. "You'll love this," he said. "Their email server crashed. Too many records requests. Good. Let them drown in their own paperwork." The pressure built like steam in a closed pipe. Brenda couldn't stop it, couldn't file it away. Then came the final insult. The HOA's annual summer kickoff gala, a grand pretentious event they held every year right on my Marina lawn, was canceled. Officially, the email said, due to unforeseen venue complications. Unofficially, it was because the gate I'd installed made their exclusive access to the lake disappear overnight. That email broke something in the community. Families had paid dues for that event, kids looked forward to it, and now, thanks to Brenda's ego, it was gone. By the end of the week, people were whispering in grocery aisles, arguing on sidewalks, calling for new elections. The board that once ruled through fear was crumbling under its own arrogance. I didn't have to say a word. I just watched. Still, I wasn't done. I called Maya again and asked a simple question. How much evidence do we need before the DA takes notice? She didn't hesitate. One forged document. That's all. Her words hit me like a spark to powder. Because I suddenly remembered something Hank mentioned when the excavator crew arrived. Brenda had shown them a permit, claimed it came from the county. If that permit existed and it was fake, it was the nail in her coffin. So I started digging again. I visited the county records office, checked every demolition permit issued that month. Nothing matched the Marina address. No record, no authorization. But then through one of Maya's contacts, we tracked down the subcontractor himself, a man named Mason Riggs, owner of a one-truck excavation outfit. He was nervous at first, said he just did what the client asked. But when Maya laid the paperwork in front of him, showing him the deed, the property lines, and the fine print of liability, his tone changed fast. She said she had the owner's consent, he muttered. Showed me a permit. I still got a copy somewhere. Didn't feel right, so I scanned it. He emailed it over within the hour. The permit looked official enough to fool anyone. At first glance, county logo, inspector signature, even a case number. But Maya caught it immediately: wrong numbering sequence, wrong font, and the seal was slightly off-center. A counterfeit. She looked up at me and grinned. Congratulations, Captain. You just moved this from civil court to criminal. I didn't grin back. I just stared at the paper. It wasn't joy. I felt it was relief. For the first time since they destroyed Evelyn's promise, I could see the end of the storm. Let's make it official, I said. Time to pull the anchor on this whole operation. By dawn the next day, the lake was calm, but the air buzzed with a tension you could taste. The kind of quiet that makes birds stay low and fishermen talk softer. Everyone in Eagle Ridge knew something was coming. They just didn't know who was about to get dragged under. At 8:32 a.m., 2 unmarked sedans rolled into the HOA's beige brick clubhouse. The engines idled for a moment, then the doors opened, and out stepped 2 detectives from the Maple County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Unit. Both wore that look seasoned cops have when they already know you're guilty but want to hear you lie first. They walked in through the front doors, no sirens, no shouting, calm, surgical. Inside, Brenda Klein and her treasurer Sandra Pike were already there. According to later reports, they'd been organizing files since 6 a.m. Translation shredding everything with their names on it. The detectives followed the sound of the shredder like bloodhounds. When they opened the door, Brenda reportedly froze mid-motion, one hand full of papers, the other clutching her clipboard like a shield. Sandra tried to block the trash bin with her foot. Ladies, one detective said, we'll be taking that. They unplugged the shredder, bagged the papers, and started photographing everything. Within minutes, the clubhouse had turned from a symbol of power into a crime scene. I didn't see it happen in person, but I didn't need to. By lunchtime, the whole town had. A local news van arrived before the ink on the warrant dried. Someone, maybe one of the residents, maybe the janitor, had tipped them off. The 6 o'clock broadcast showed everything. Brenda's perfectly manicured hands cuffed behind her back, her expression flickering between disbelief and fury as officers led her out. Sandra, pale and shaking, sobbed so hard she could barely walk. The voiceover from the reporter was almost poetic. Lakefront HOA president arrested on charges of fraud, forgery, and destruction of private property. When I saw it on TV, I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. I just turned the volume down and watched the reflection of the water ripple across the screen. Justice doesn't roar, it hums. The next morning, the HOA board imploded like a sandcastle in high tide. 3 members resigned immediately, citing loss of confidence. One, the so-called compliance officer, tried to defend Brenda on social media. Bad idea. Within hours, residents buried him under screenshots of fines, angry emails, and evidence of years of intimidation. By the weekend, the state attorney general's office announced a full-scale audit of Eagle Ridge Estates HOA. What they found would have made the IRS blush. Tens of thousands in unaccounted fees, false liens against properties, kickbacks to favored contractors, even payments disguised as consulting services that went directly into Brenda's personal bank account. She'd been robbing her neighbors blind under the banner of community improvement. Meanwhile, the residents, those same people who once crossed the bridge and looked at me like I was some cranky old recluse, started to change. They weren't whispering anymore. They were organizing. A man named Doug Foster, a retired accountant, started circulating a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. "We've lived under a dictatorship," he said at the town meeting, voice shaking with righteous anger. "It's time we lived like neighbors again." Within 3 days, he had 200 signatures. Within a week, nearly every household had signed. They didn't just want Brenda gone, they wanted the entire system dismantled. While the legal wheels turned, I focused on cleaning up what was left of my Marina. The wreckage of Evelyn's promise still floated near slipped 12 pieces of mahogany and brass glinting beneath the surface like buried treasure. I spent 3 full days with a rake and a net pulling her remains from the water piece by piece. Every plank I lifted felt heavier than it should have. Eli offered to help, but I told him no. Some ghosts you have to face alone. When I finally recovered the brass nameplate, Evelyn's promise, the letters scarred and blackened, I just stood there, water dripping from my gloves. I realized that what Brenda had destroyed wasn't my wife's memory, it was the illusion that I was done fighting. That night, I took the nameplate home, cleaned it, and set it on my desk beside the Marina deed. It gleamed softly in the lamplight. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. But peace doesn't come cheap. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Maya. "You sitting down, should I be Brenda's attorney, just offered a settlement." I raised an eyebrow. Already she knows she's cooked. The DA's office confirmed the forgery charge sticks. She's looking at jail time, but her insurance company's desperate to minimize civil damages. They're offering you full replacement costs for the boat plus punitive damages. How much? Maya hesitated. Low 6 figures. I let out a long breath. That was enough to rebuild the Marina twice over. Enough to walk away rich. But the money didn't interest me. What mattered was why I'd fought in the first place. "I'll take it," I said, on one condition, which is, they don't rebuild a damn thing. That money goes straight to something that lasts. Maya smiled. "You've got something in mind, don't you?" I nodded. "Yeah." Evelyn always said, "Real legacy isn't what you build, it's what you help others build." When the news broke that the lawsuit had settled, the residents of Eagle Ridge did something I didn't expect. They threw a barbecue. Not one of those HOA-mandated RSVP-only events. A real one. Kids, dogs, guitars, folding chairs. Someone even hung a hand-painted sign on the gate that used to say, "Private Access." The new one read, "Welcome to Cedar Cove, everyone's Marina." For the first time in years, laughter replaced the drone of HOA rules. I stood off to the side, a plate of ribs in hand, watching as people I'd barely spoken to for a decade came over to thank me. Not for revenge, not for the fence, but for standing up. "You reminded us what this place was supposed to be," Doug said. "A community, not a company." The next few months passed quietly. The state completed its audit, and the HOA was formally dissolved by a near-unanimous vote. The old clubhouse Brenda's Kingdom was sold at auction to pay off legal debts. I heard some of the proceeds even went toward reimbursing residents for bogus fines. Funny how justice has a way of redistributing wealth. As for Brenda, she pleaded guilty to forgery and fraud. The judge, an older woman, with a no-nonsense haircut, handed down a sentence of 2 years and a lifetime ban from serving on any homeowners association board in the state. She didn't apologize. People like her rarely do. But when the cuffs clicked around her wrists, I like to think she finally understood what it feels like to lose control. Life at the Marina changed after that. The air felt lighter. Boats came back, kids fished off the docks, and neighbors, real neighbors, stopped by just to talk. One morning, I caught Hank repairing a broken railing on the pier. I walked over and offered him a coffee. He took it, smiled shyly. "Never thought I'd see the day Eagle Ridge went belly up." "Guess we both learned something," I said. "What's that?" "That when bullies build on stolen land, the foundation always cracks." He laughed. "That's one way to put it." As the sun rose over Cedar Cove, its reflection turning the lake into molten gold, I realized something simple but profound. Revenge might have started this story, but restoration was how it ended. Still, every once in a while, I'd glance at the footbridge, the one that used to bring Brenda's minions to my docks. It was quiet now, half overgrown with vines. I left it that way. Let nature reclaim what arrogance abandoned. When I finally rehung the polished nameplate on a new post at the Marina's entrance, Evelyn's Marina, it wasn't an act of mourning, it was a declaration. That no matter how much power a title or a clipboard pretends to hold ownership, real ownership comes from love, labor, and law. And as far as I'm concerned, those 3 are untouchable. I thought that would be the end of it, the arrests, the settlements, the headlines. But the funny thing about storms is when the thunder fades, you can finally hear the smaller sounds again. The creak of the dock, the hum of insects, the laughter that doesn't have to hide behind closed doors. Cedar Cove was breathing again. Every morning I'd walk the marina, coffee in hand, nodding to faces that had once turned away. The air felt cleaner, lighter. No one was measuring the height of another man's fence anymore. No one cared if your kayak was blue or neon green. Folks were living, not policing. But for me, peace came harder. There were still nights I'd wake up sweating, hearing the crunch of timber in my dreams. I'd see Evelyn's promise crushed beneath that excavator's claw, smell the diesel, feel the helplessness all over again. The body can forget, but the soul keeps score. So I did what I'd always done. When life turned heavy, I built. The insurance money from the settlement sat untouched in an account. To most people, that kind of cash would be a ticket to comfort. A new boat, a new truck, maybe a quiet cabin somewhere far away from HOA drama. But I didn't want comfort. I wanted purpose. Evelyn used to say, "A man's worth is measured by what he leaves behind that helps someone else start." She came from a family of tradespeople, her dad a welder, her mom a woodworker. When she died, I'd lost the heartbeat of my home. When they demolished her boat, I lost the echo. So I decided to build something that would outlive me, something she'd have been proud of. That week, I drove to the local community college. The place smelled like sawdust and coffee, the kind of scent that always felt like potential. I met with the dean of trades programs, an older woman named Dr. Naomi Klein. "I want to fund a scholarship," I told her, "for kids learning honest work, marine mechanics, welding, carpentry, anything that builds, not just manages." She blinked, taken aback. "That's a generous idea, Mr. Mercer. Do you have a name for it?" I smiled. "Yeah, the Evelyn Mercer Memorial Scholarship." Her expression softened. "Your wife," I nodded. "We set it up that same month. The endowment would cover tuition, tools, and materials for students who couldn't afford the basics. Every semester, 2 new trades students would carry her name forward, one to build boats, one to repair them. It wasn't vengeance, it was legacy. Meanwhile, life at the marina began to take on its old rhythm, maybe even a better one. Families started visiting again, renting slips, grilling on weekends. A few of the old Eagle Ridge residents still wandered by now and then, not to complain, but to apologize. One woman, the same, who'd once filed a noise complaint over Hank's fishing radio, brought me a cherry pie. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "We didn't know what was really going on." I smiled. Apology accepted. "Next time bring vanilla ice cream too." We both laughed, the first real laugh either of us had had in months. By summer, Cedar Cove had turned into what Eagle Ridge had pretended to be all along, a real community. No titles, no hierarchies, just people looking out for one another. Even the bridge that once connected the HOA's world to mine found new purpose. I left it standing, vines curling up its rails, wood silvering in the Sunday kids fish from it. Couples took photos there. It became a symbol of something simpler, connection without control. One afternoon, as I was patching the dock near Slip 12, a boy wandered over. He couldn't have been more than 14, skinny, sunburned, curious eyes. He stood there for a bit, watching me work, then finally asked, "Mister, what's that stuff you're mixing?" "Epoxy sealant," I said. "Keeps the water from eating the wood." He nodded seriously, studying the way I brushed it across the grain. "You always do it like that." "Always," I said. "Preparation's half the job. If you rush, the water finds a way in." He thought about that for a second, then said, "That true for people too." I paused, looked at him. The kid had the kind of earnestness you can't fake. "Yeah," I said, finally, "especially people." He grinned and I handed him the brush. "You want to try?" He worked carefully, tongue poking out in concentration. The strokes weren't perfect, but they were steady. When we finished, he looked down at the shining plank and smiled like he'd just built a skyscraper. "What's your name, kid?" "Leo," he said. "My family moved here after the HOA broke up. My dad said this place feels free." "Your dad's a smart man," I said. "You ever think about working with your hands?" "Yeah," he said eagerly. "I like fixing things. I just don't know where to start." I told him about the scholarship. His eyes lit up like sunrise. A few months later, Leo became one of its first recipients. He'd come by every weekend after class, eager to learn more. I showed him how to read the wood, how to tell when the grain's fighting you, how to use patience instead of force. And somewhere between the sanding and the sealing, I realized he wasn't just fixing wood, he was fixing me. Teaching him gave my grief somewhere to go. Every time I saw his hands covered in sawdust and stubbornness, I saw a future Evelyn would have loved. One evening, I sat on the porch of the Marina office watching the sunset bleed across the water. The air smelled of pine and varnish. Leo and his dad were packing up their gear, waving as they left. I waved back, my heart strangely light. The docks were quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of loss. It was the peace of something completed. In the months that followed, the story of Eagle Ridge spread far beyond Maple Harbor. Local papers ran headlines like HOA fraud, leads to community rebirth, and from wreckage to renewal, the man who owned the Marina. Strangers would stop by just to shake my hand. A few even asked if I'd write a book. I always laughed that off. I'm no writer, I'd say. I just know how to hold a grudge until it turns into something useful. But deep down, I understood why people were drawn to the story. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about standing your ground in a world that loves to move boundaries. About refusing to be bullied by people who mistake paperwork for power. One afternoon, Maya came by with a folder under her arm. They finally closed the case, she said. Eagle Ridge HOA is officially dissolved. No appeals, no successors. I took the folder and smiled. Guess the lake finally swallowed the monster. She grinned. How's the scholarship doing? Better than I expected, I said. You should see those kids. They're hungry, not for money, but for craft. That's rare these days. She nodded. Evelyn would have liked that. I looked out over the water sunlight catching the ripples. Yeah, I said softly. She would have. Before she left, Maya turned back. You ever think about rebuilding the boat? I shook my head. No. Some things aren't meant to be replaced. They're meant to teach you how to start again. That night the moon hung low over the lake, its reflection trembling in the water like a heartbeat. I walked down to slip 12, sat on the edge of the dock, and dipped my hand into the cool dark. Thank you, I whispered, not to Evelyn, not even to fate, but to the lake itself. It had taken, yes, but it had also given. Balance restored. And as the water lapped gently against the pilings, I finally understood something simple but powerful. Justice isn't about winning, it's about restoring the level. The next morning I replaced the old sign at the entrance. Not the polished one with corporate lettering, just a wooden plank I carved myself. It read, Evelyn's Marina built on memory run on respect. Underneath I added a smaller line burned into the wood with a soldering iron. You can't find your way out of gravity. Because in the end, that's what all this was about. Gravity. The pull of truth, of decency, of people finally standing up and saying enough. And if you're watching this now, wondering if you can take on your own HOA, Brenda, remember, you don't have to be a lawyer or a fighter. You just have to own your ground and know where the lines are drawn. Because once you understand that no clipboard in the world can touch you, the thing about lakes is they remember. You can skim the surface for a while, pretend what sank doesn't matter, but the water keeps an archive. After the arrests, after the scholarship, after the barbecue where neighbors acted like neighbors again, the lake started returning its receipts. It began with a rainbow sheen that shouldn't have been there, thin, iridescent, clinging to the cattails by the old boat ramp like bad perfume. I knelt, dipped, 2 fingers, smelled diesel, and something sharper, artificial. Varnish. The sort of chemical you only find in a restoration bay or in a pile of pulverized mahogany that used to be a yacht. I called the county watermaster and the environmental quality office. Polite voices, lots of forms. Government has 2 speeds, asleep and advisory, so I gave them evidence they couldn't nap through. I pulled the dock camera clips from the day of the demolition, time-stamped, geotagged, cloud-backed, and handed them over with a chain of custody sheet I typed myself. 30 years in the Navy teaches you that if you want a report taken seriously, you staple it to a timeline and draw a map. 2 days later, a pair of field inspectors and waiters were at Cedar Cove scooping samples like they were panning for gold. They walked the shoreline, pointed at streaks on stones, took photos of the gouges where the excavator tracks had chewed the bank. One of them looked at me and asked, "Where did the debris go into the water?" I said. "On tape." They traded a glance. "That's bureaucrat for we've got a problem." Meanwhile, the town's gossip mill was in full spin cycle. Folks who used to whisper HOA bylaws now whispered about indictments, audits, and a rumored list of special contractors who'd been paid double for half the work. The name at the top, Franklin Dauber Compliance Tough Guy Turned Ghost, started showing up in places it shouldn't: invoices, text messages, a vendor roster written in Sandra's tidy script. Maya called me one evening while I was sanding a skiff by lamplight. "Your environmental complaint stuck," she said, practically cheerful. "County's issuing violation notices to the HOA entity and get this to the demolition contractor's bond provider. Somebody's writing checks." "Good," I said. "Maybe they'll use some of it to scrub the cattails." "Not just that," she added. "The DA wants victim statements from residents who paid bogus fines. The more affidavits, the stronger the felony pattern." I whistled low. "You'll get a stack. I've got 3 binders already." We didn't just have anger anymore. We had organization. After the summer gala cancellation, the residents formed a working group, no titles, no officers, just people with notebooks. They met on the picnic tables at my marina because the clubhouse felt tainted. We laid out poster boards, who was fined for what, when names filled in like constellations. Kayaks, wind chimes, dock stains, garden gnomes, 3 of those apparently. Eagle Ridge had a vendetta against whimsy. Doug Foster did what retired accountants do when handed a mystery. He balanced it. Cross-referenced dates with deposits. Found round number consulting withdrawals that always hit on Fridays. They weren't even good at hiding it, he muttered, pencil tapping. They were just loud. The next town forum was different. No dais, no raised stage. We sat in a circle at Cedar Cove with cheap coffee mosquitoes and an old portable speaker that crackled when you breathed wrong. People spoke like they were exhaling for the first time. A row of teenagers sat at the back eavesdropping with that casual alertness kids use when they're filing adults' choices under how not to run things. Then the lake sent another ripple. A late summer squall rolled in, not a storm big enough to make the news, just one of those sudden mean tempers weather gets when it remembers mountains. Wind punched whitecaps across the cove. I saw the first trouble at the footbridge. 2 middle schoolers in a dented canoe, paddling like panic, the bow slewing sideways toward the rocks where the creek spat into the lake. I don't remember dropping the sander. I remember my knees hitting wood, the press of air in my chest, my hands choosing. I sprinted the pier, grabbed the throw bag, and shouted from a belly that hadn't forgotten command. Paddles down. Heads low. Catchline on 3. On 3, the canoe clipped a piling and tried to roll. The kids' eyes were bright with the kind of fear that hasn't learned to lie. I put the throw dead on. They grabbed. The line sang. Eli, who'd been tinkering with a camera mount, was already at my shoulder. The 2 of us hauled hand over hand, inching them out of the suck of the creek mouth until the canoe kissed my ladder like it loved it. The moment their sneakers hit dock, their mother arrived, sprinting, sobbing, scolding, hugging. The storm, embarrassed, turned its pockets out and wandered off. Adrenaline leaves you punchy. Eli looked at me and grinned. We don't charge a rescue amenity fee for that right, only if their life vests clash with the acoustic harmony, I said. We laughed like idiots because sometimes that's how you bleed pressure without opening a vein. The rescue was nothing heroic, not really. But it spread. The same network that carried HOA edicts now carried a story about the Marina guy who didn't ask for permission to do the right thing. The circle at our next meeting was bigger. The portable speaker wheezed, but it held. That night, Doug stood up with a motion dissolve. The HOA replace it with a voluntary co-op that collected just enough money to mow the entrance and host 2 block parties a year. No fines, he said. No rulers. Just neighbors. They voted by raising hands. No dramatic speeches. No stern gavel. The unanimous wave of fingers looked like wheat in a steady wind. While the community learned how to breathe, I kept tugging on threads. We found the subcontractor's forged permit had a typo in the inspector's name, 1 extra N, amateur hour. The county clerk, insulted on behalf of language, forwarded our packet to the state licensing board. Mason, the excavator guy, sat down with the DA and told the truth on paper. He'd lose money but keep his license. That's the thing with small operators. They live or die by whether people believe they meant harm. Brenda tried one more trick from the old playbook, a restraint order petition, claiming I'd menaced her at the public HOA meeting weeks earlier. The judge read the transcript, watched the live stream, and asked her a question you never want a judge to ask. Are you certain you wish to proceed under oath? She withdrew it, quietly. 3 months after the cuffs, her plea deal landed. 2 years suspended to 18 months, with good behavior restitution to residents from the aesthetics slush, plus a permanent bar from nonprofit board service. The court read a line that tasted like clean water. Authority exercised without jurisdiction is a form of theft. I wrote it down, framed it later. The environmental case ended with fines, remediation orders, and an afternoon where volunteers dragged contractor trash from the reeds and stacked it on the boat ramp like a crooked art exhibit. Kids in rubber boots discovered they like work better when it smells like accomplishment instead of fear. A biology teacher from the high school turned the cleanup into a lesson about riparian buffers. The teenagers pretended to be bored and absorbed every word. The police officer who'd called it civil came by the marina one evening, hat in hand. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I should have listened harder." I looked at him for a long beat. "Listening's a skill," I said. "Good news is you can practice." He nodded. "I'm practicing." We shook hands. It didn't fix anything, but it placed a brace where the beam had sagged. On the scholarship front, the first 2 recipients, Leo and a welder named Talia, invited me to their skills showcase. I stood in the echo of a cinderblock shop while Leo explained a carburetor like he was preaching. Talia welded a bead so clean it looked poured. When the dean handed them certificates, the crowd clapped like they were launching a ship. I felt Evelyn everywhere in the heat, the grit, the grins. "Think you'll ever build her again?" Leo asked later, eyes flicking to the etched brass plate I'd mounted in the shop's lobby. "No," I said, and watched the tiny hurt cross his face. "But we're building something better, hands that can build anything." He smiled. "Understood. Kids like him usually do." I kept the footbridge open after that. "No keypads, no signs," shouted in all caps. We replaced a few rotten boards together on a Saturday. Someone carved a heart the size of a quarter into the rail. I didn't sand it out. Not all graffiti is damage. Some of it is testimony. In late autumn, we held a small regatta. Nothing official, just a handful of boats and too many life jackets. Hank wore a sun-beaten grin and a t-shirt that said "World's Best Grandpa," the same phrase the HOA once fined him for, in vinyl banner form. The start horn was a kid with a whistle and more confidence than lungs. Folks cheered like we'd invented water. When the last boat nosed in, I stood at the end of the pier and looked back at Cedar Cove, the repaired rails, the new sign, the circle of folding chairs, the quiet that no longer felt like held breath. The lake was keeping a softer archive now, one made of small, good choices. People asked me what the trick was. How did we beat the papers and the fines and the tone a person gets when they believe a title makes them taller? There isn't one trick. There's a toolbox. You use law like a level. You use sunlight like sandpaper. You use neighbors like clamps, steady pressure, no panic. And when a storm comes, you don't argue with the wind. You keep the line lean low and pull together. That's not drama. That's maintenance. And if we're lucky, maintenance becomes culture. A lake that remembers what sank and what we hauled back up. Winter came slow to Maple Harbor that year, the kind of slow that makes you count breaths and watch ice form one lace-thin layer at a time along the edges of the docks. Normally I hated winter, the quiet, the way the world holds its breath, but this time it felt deserved. After all the noise, after the shouting sirens and courtroom chatter, silence wasn't a burden, it was penance. The lake had finally forgiven us. You could see it in how the water cleared. For months, the silt and paint flecks from Evelyn's promise had clouded the cove. Now, the water ran clear again, cold, reflective, almost surgical. Nature doesn't rush justice. She waits until everyone's too tired to lie, then she cleans house. It had been 6 months since Brenda's conviction. She was serving her time in the county facility just upstate, and rumor had it she spent her days scrubbing cafeteria trays. I didn't care. She was part of another life, now a ghost from a war I'd already buried. But her downfall had done something strange. It made the rest of the town look at itself. Turns out HOA corruption wasn't just an Eagle Ridge problem. It was a cultural infection, tiny fiefdoms across the county, using community standards as weapons. Maya had been fielding calls from homeowners in 3 other neighborhoods, asking how they could take back control from boards that had gone rogue. "I didn't mean to start a revolution," I told her over coffee one morning. She smirked. "You didn't. You just reminded people that a deed beats a clipboard." Fair enough. My own life had shifted in ways I didn't expect. The Marina was thriving. Word had spread, and now folks came from neighboring towns to dock their boats at Cedar Cove, drawn by the story more than the view. They wanted to stand on the same planks where the HOA's greed had drowned and say they'd seen it. I didn't mind. Tourists come and go, but respect stays. Eli started calling it the Redemption Dock, said I should trademark it. I told him if he said brand synergy one more time, I'd toss him in the lake. What really surprised me, though, was how the next generation took over the place. The scholarship kids, Leo, Talia, and later a few more, had made the Marina their home base. They'd show up after class tools in hand faces smeared with grease and sawdust, talking shop like old-timers. The docks were full of laughter again, that beautiful, messy, human kind of noise I didn't realize I missed. One weekend, Leo brought his father, a quiet man named Mike, who'd worked construction before the recession hit him hard. He stood at the water's edge for a long time, watching his son replace planks on the new slip. "You gave him something real," Mike said finally. "Most people just give kids advice. You gave him wood and a reason." I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. Later that afternoon, Leo showed me something he'd built, a small wooden model of Evelyn's promise. Crude, sure, but the proportions were right. The curve of the hull, the lettering on the stern. "I used pictures from your old binder," he said shyly. "Figured you might like to see her float again." My throat closed up. I set the model gently on the water beside the dock. It rocked for a moment, steadying itself like it knew the way. "She looks good, kid," I said. "She really does." That night, I sat by the fire with a glass of whiskey and the model boat beside me. It hit me then the full circle. The thing they destroyed had become the blueprint for something better. Evelyn's memory wasn't nailed to one boat. It was alive in the hands of anyone who built with care. The next morning, I got a visit from an unexpected face. Officer Wells, the same cop who'd called my complaint a civil matter, walked up the dock holding 2 cups of coffee. "I brought peace offerings," he said, "and maybe a small confession." I raised an eyebrow. "About the part where you guarded a crime scene for the criminals," he grimaced. "Yeah, that one." He took a sip, then looked out at the water. "You were right. We got lazy. We thought paperwork equaled proof. We stopped seeing people behind the property lines. It won't happen again." I nodded slowly. "Good. Just remember, authority isn't supposed to replace judgment." He smiled. "You ever thought about running for the county board? We could use someone who reads property maps better than politicians." I laughed. "Son, I fought one board. That's my lifetime quota." Still, the idea lingered longer than I'd like to admit. Not about politics, God, no, but about responsibility. Because when you've seen how power corrupts the smallest corners of ordinary life, you start realizing that silence isn't neutrality, it's fertilizer for tyranny. Later that week, Maya dropped by with good news and bad news. "Good news," she said, handing me a folder. "The restitution checks cleared. Residents got every cent back. And the bad, the county wants to name the rebuilt waterfront trail after you. Mercer Walk." I groaned. "Please tell me that's a joke." She laughed. "Afraid not. Apparently you're a symbol now. Deal with it." I told her they could name it after Evelyn instead. The fight wasn't about me, it was about memory and the right to hold on to something sacred even when the world calls it outdated. She agreed to push for it. A month later, the new wooden arch went up Evelyn's Walk, honoring hands that build not break. The dedication drew half the town. Kids ran across the bridge, dogs barked, people clapped for no reason except to feel the air move. Standing there, I realized something: forgiveness doesn't erase the damage. It just stops you from drowning in it. That winter, the scholarship doubled in size. Donations poured in from people who'd read the story online. They said it reminded them of their fathers, their mothers, their own fights with little tyrants in ties. One letter stuck with me, a widow from Kansas who wrote, "I never knew your wife, but I understand her spirit. My late husband built wooden toys for neighborhood kids." The HOA fined us for running an unauthorized business. We sold the house. Thank you for standing up when I couldn't. I framed her letter and hung it beside the Marina sign. Because that's what stories do when they're told right. They ripple outward, touching shores you'll never see. As spring crept back, I found myself sitting more often at the end of the pier, just watching the horizon. The world had moved on, but the water remembered every step of the battle. Sometimes I swore I could still hear the hum of the old yacht engine faint under the waves. One evening, Leo joined me carrying 2 mugs of cocoa instead of whiskey. "You ever think about building a new one?" he asked. Not Evelyn's promise, but something new. I thought about it. About the smell of sawdust, the rhythm of sanding, the way a hull takes shape like it's remembering what it was born to do. "Maybe," I said. "If I do, you're helping." He grinned. "Deal." The sun dipped low, setting the water ablaze. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. Not even nostalgic. Just still. You see, revenge stories always end the same way: on paper, with a victory, a downfall, a lesson learned. But in real life, they end when you wake up one morning, pour your coffee, and realize the anger doesn't own you anymore. The lake had taken enough. Now it was time to build. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Evelyn wanted all along. Spring didn't ease into Maple Harbor. It arrived like a verdict. The dogwoods bloomed all at once, the lake shrugged off its gray, and the town started walking a little taller, as if the air itself had remembered how to stand up straight. That's when the calls started again. Not the frantic kind we'd weathered for months, but the steady, purposeful kind neighbors from other subdivisions, small towns, cul-de-sacs, with big gates asking the same thing in different voices. "How do we make sure this never happens here?" I kept telling them the same truth. You don't fix culture with a headline. You fix it with a blueprint. And blueprints, unlike speeches, have measurements. Maya showed up one morning with coffee and a spark. "If you're done winning the story," she said, "we should win the statute." Her idea was simple and seditious in the most American way: write a local ordinance that would slam every door Brenda had slithered through. We sat at the Marina office table, me, Maya, Eli, and Doug, with his accountant's pencil drafting language that would make a county clerk whistle. We called it, half as a joke and then not a joke at all, the Evelyn Ordinance. It had teeth. No HOA authority beyond recorded parcel boundaries under penalty of fraud. Any demolition of private property within county limits required 1 owner, consent in writing 2, a valid county permit with verifiable case number, and 3 for 8-hour posted notice. Aesthetic fines capped and reportable. Every dollar traceable in an online ledger. No private compliance patrols without visible ID. A written citable ordinance and body-worn camera footage open to public records requests. Licenses masquerading as easements must be titled correctly revocable, per their terms, and recorded, or they don't exist. We scrubbed the legalese until the thing was clean enough to eat off. Then we started counting votes. The county board was 5 people and a spectrum of caution. 2 members were already on our side. 1 had a wind chime story. I couldn't improve if I tried. Another leaned corporate liked public-private partnerships, which is politician for hope. Nobody reads the fine print. The chairwoman, a short, steel-eyed woman who'd once been a public defender, said, "If you bring me residents, I'll bring you a hearing." We brought residents. The night of the hearing, the chamber was shoulder to shoulder, not angry, focused. Fishermen with calloused hands, teachers with red pens, kids in hoodies, retirees in sensible shoes who smelled like peppermint and war stories. I brought the brass nameplate from Evelyn's Promise and set it on the podium. When the chairwoman raised an eyebrow, I said, "It's not a prop, it's proof." Maya outlined the ordinance like she was laying keel. Doug followed with charts of fines that didn't match budgets. Then we did something Brenda's board never risked. We opened the floor. Hank spoke first. "They fined me for a banner my granddaughter made. I paid it because I was afraid. I ain't afraid anymore." A woman I'd never met talked about repainting a dock twice in one summer to chase a shade called neighborhood taupe. A young father said his HOA threatened liens over a bright yellow kayak because it clashed with the shoreline. He pointed toward the back where his son sat, hugging that exact kayak outside like a trophy. Laughter rolled, the warm bonding kind. Then Leo walked up, jeans with sanding dust on them, voice steady. "You can make a kid follow rules, or you can make a kid learn respect. Only one of those lasts." He gestured to the nameplate. "That used to be wood. Now it's a story. The first helps you float. The second tells you where to go." When he stepped back, the room exhaled. The developer lobbyist tried a soft shoe routine about flexibility and community standards, wearing a suit that cost what a family spends on a month of groceries. The chairwoman asked him to define community without using the word board. He couldn't. You could hear the hinge snap on the door he was trying to walk through. We got the votes 4-1. The Evelyn ordinance passed with an amendment for a county-wide portal where residents could see fines, budgets, and board votes without having to pry the data out with a crowbar. The chairwoman banged the gavel and said authority stops where the deed begins. Somebody started clapping. Then the room did what rooms do when they witness the hinge of a moment. It turned into applause that felt like weather. You'd think that would be the end of the fight. But the old world doesn't retreat, it tries to rebrand. A week later, a consortium offered to buy my Marina at a number large enough to test a man's principles. The letter was all sugar, unlock value, synergize waterfront experiences, partner for tomorrow. I read it twice and felt like I needed a shower. I wrote back, "This Marina doesn't need unlocking. It needs a lock from people like you." Then I stapled a copy of the ordinance to the letter and mailed it certified. Call it customer service. The consortium pivoted to the county board, pushing a lake beautification district. Sounded friendly. Smelled like HOA with lipstick. We showed up with sunlight. The beautification district died in committee, and I found the lobbyist in the hallway afterwards staring at his phone like it could rewind time. "Here's your problem," I said quietly. "You think property is paper. We think it's memory." He didn't answer. People like that don't argue. They migrate. While the politics cooled, the work warmed. Evelyn's walk filled with strollers and dogs. The footbridge got its new boards. The lake returned to the shoulder. Shrug rhythm of a place that knows winter won't last. On Saturdays, we held free dock school. No banners, no tuition. Just anyone who wanted to learn how to tie a bowline, set a cleat hitch, read weather off a waterline, mix epoxy, without making a mess you'll never forgive. The first day, 7 people came. By the third Saturday, we had 32 plus a grandmother who taught us all a faster way to coil rope. One afternoon, as we were showing a little girl how to sand with the grain because rebellion is for better causes, a shadow fell across the dock. It was a man built like a refrigerator in a suit too tight for a conscience. Franklin Dauber, Brenda's old enforcer, flanked by a thin lawyer with a briefcase and a tremor. Frank tried for intimidation and landed on parody. "You're trespassing on," he stopped when he read the sign. "Evelyn's Marina." His mouth worked around the new syllables like they were gristle. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, Mr. Dauber is here to request the return of HOA property. namely several documents and the wooden banner you displayed at the hearing. The one we submitted into the public record, I asked. That property. He coughed. Well, technically, Eli tapped the camera mounted above us. You're both being recorded. Body cam policy we recommend for all compliance personnel, he said brightly. We can send you the ordinance. Frank took a step forward like old habits were looking for a host. The tremor lawyer put a hand on his sleeve, whispering a reminder that the world had changed. They left empty-handed because sometimes victory is just the other guy walking away before he says something he'll hear again in court. Summer opened like a sail. The scholarship fund doubled again. A local tool company donated 6 full kits to students with good grades and dirty fingernails. We set a date for a regatta and made it stubbornly old-school hand-lettered flyers potluck table, a rule that said no one eats until the last boat ties up. Hank's granddaughter painted a new banner, and this time we hung it from the pier like it was a flag on the good ship Common Sense. On regatta day, the lake wore its best. A light wind combed the water, gulls heckled us lovingly, and the sun played fair. Boats lined up, ugly ones, pretty ones, a canoe with a patch that looked like it was telling the truth. The start horn was a kid named Mateo with a battered whistle and lungs that had finally grown into authority. Halfway through a squall, teased the ridge and thought better of it. The fleet came home grinning. We ate too much pee. The co-op voted to buy a shared tool chest and a defibrillator because communities that know how to celebrate also know how to prepare. As the sun leaned west, Leo brought out the thing he'd been sneaking to the shop at night, a small skiff he'd built with Talia. Nothing fancy, everything right. We carried it to the water together. He looked at me, waiting for the christening he'd never seen but always imagined. I didn't break a bottle. I set the brass nameplate from Evelyn's promise onto the bow for a breath, then lifted it away. Some legacies you touch without fastening the way a hand rests on a shoulder before a speech. Name her, I said. He glanced at the crowd, then at the lake that had taught him both danger and delight. Second wind, he said. We launched her on a 3 count. She took water like an old truth takes an argument calmly. The oars dipped. The skiff moved. People clapped the way you clap for a future that didn't exist yesterday. Later, when the dock had emptied and the pie pans were accusing us of mercy, I walked Evelyn's walk alone. The breeze lifted the edge of the new trail sign, the boards hummed the low note of content wood, and the lake stored another gentle receipt. I thought of the ordinance, the kids, the old men who stopped being afraid, the cop who learned to listen, the judge who said the line I framed, the chairwoman who gave us a hearing instead of a shrug. Revenge had been the spark. Restoration was the fire. But law, that quiet squared tool, was the hearth. It kept the heat, made it useful, and warned off cold hands wearing nice watches. By the time I got back to the marina, Eli was locking up. He pointed at the sky. Look, he said, your weather. It was that rare, holy blue that makes you forgive every storm you've seen. I stood there long enough to memorize it. Because storms will come. That's their job. Ours is to keep a level deck, to write down what works, and to teach the next hands where the lines are. We did that. We're doing it still. By late summer, the marina had settled into a rhythm, so even the gulls seemed to know the schedule. 7 a.m., the first coffee cup clinks against the dock railing. 8, the hum of Sanders and the chatter of Leo and Talia bickering about who mixed the epoxy wrong. Noon, Hank's fishing line cuts a perfect arc across the sunlight, and the smell of cedar dust rides the wind like incense. Peace had weight. I could feel it pressing down on my shoulders every morning, heavy, not suffocating but grounding. After a year of chaos, the quiet almost frightened me. People talk about wanting closure, but they never mention how alien it feels when you finally get it. Then, one morning, a thick envelope arrived with the county seal. I braced myself for trouble. Old habits die slower than villains, but it wasn't bad news. It was an invitation the State Conference on Community Governance wanted me to speak. Maya called 10 minutes later, her voice a mix of amusement and pride. They're putting you on a panel called Reforming Local Power. I groaned. Sounds like they expect a sermon. Just tell your story, she said. You've got the receipts and the scars. I wasn't sure I wanted the spotlight again. Revenge had made a compelling headline, but what we'd built after that fragile peace felt too sacred to parade around. Still, Evelyn's name was on the scholarship, the ordinance, the trail, the marina. I owed it to her memory not to go quiet when it mattered. 2 weeks later, I drove to Salem, suit press speech, scribbled on the back of an old tide chart. The conference center buzzed with polite chaos, bad coffee, name tags, the hum of civic optimism. On stage, I stood between a mayor who spoke in slogans and a lawyer who could quote zoning law like scripture. When my turn came, I didn't read the notes. I just looked at the room and told them the truth. I'm not a politician, I began. I'm a man who rebuilt something after it was destroyed by people who mistook paperwork for power. The law doesn't fail when it's written, it fails when no one's watching. So watch. I told them about Evelyn's promise, about the forged permit, the silence from the police, the neighbors too scared to speak until one person refused to move. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't have to. The facts carried their own gravity. When I finished, the room didn't clap right away. They just sat there absorbing. Then someone started and the rest followed. The sound rolled like thunder over calm water. Afterward, a woman approached me, state legislator pressed blazer-tired eyes. I lost my father's farm to a zoning scam in '09, she said. Maybe it's time we rewrote the playbook. We exchanged numbers. That's how seeds travel by hand, not decree. Back home, the Marina waited like an old friend. The air smelled of oil and lilac. Leo had built a new rack for life vests, neat rows by size, each labeled in his careful print. Organization prevents accidents, he said proudly. I nearly laughed. He sounded like me 20 years ago. One afternoon, while varnishing a railing, he asked, "You ever regret not rebuilding the yacht?" I thought for a moment. No, I said, because the boat was never the point. It was proof that memory's worth fighting for. But memory doesn't float unless you keep teaching someone how to build. He nodded, not fully understanding, but close enough. The co-op continued to evolve. Every few months, they'd hold what they jokingly called the unmeeting. No agenda, no minutes, no power plays, just potluck dinners where people actually listened. Decisions got made by conversation instead of decree. The first year, attendance doubled. By the second, we had to borrow folding chairs from the fire station. One of the new faces was Rosa Delgado, a high school civics teacher who'd moved to town after the scandal. She wanted to create a youth summer program around the marina. Let them learn stewardship early, she said. Water teaches accountability better than any classroom. We called it Lake Logic. Kids learn knots balance teamwork. We taught them what Brenda's board had forgotten: authority isn't about control, it's about care. By the final week, those same teenagers were helping repaint the dock posts, laughing as they left perfect handprints in blue paint on the rail. I didn't clean them off. The local paper ran a piece, From Scandal to Sanctuary, Cedar Cove's Second Wind. I didn't read the comments, but Maya did. You're officially an internet folk hero, she teased. I told her heroes wear capes. I just wore sunscreen and a bad temper. That autumn, Evelyn's Walk hosted a harvest festival, our first since the dissolution of the HOA. It wasn't fancy. A few food stalls, music from a local band, tables full of pies, yet people came from miles around. I gave a small speech, more of a toast than anything. For the record, there's no committee, no fines, no dress code. Just gratitude for each other, for second chances, and for the good kind of noise. Someone shouted, "Tell us the moral, Captain," I smiled. Fine. Moral, simple, water levels itself. People should too. Applause rippled through the crowd like wind over the cove. Later, after dusk, I walked alone to the end of the pier. The sky mirrored the lake, black glass scattered with stars. I thought of Evelyn again, how she used to say peace isn't the absence of trouble, but the presence of balance. Maybe she was right. The lake wasn't perfect. It still flooded in spring, still swallowed shoes and fishing lures. But it had healed. So had we. I sat there for an hour listening to the gentle slap of water against wood. Then I heard footsteps. Eli. He handed me a flask, no words needed. We drank in silence. "Think you'll ever leave this place?" he asked finally. "Probably not," I said. "But I wouldn't mind if it outlived me." "It will," he said simply. "You made sure of that." A few weeks later, I got a letter from the community college. They'd expanded the scholarship again, this time with state matching funds. The Ray Mercer Foundation for Skilled Trades was now permanent, backed by law. Every year, kids from across the county would learn to build, weld, and fix, turning mistakes into muscle memory. When I showed Leo the letter, he beamed. "She'd be proud," he said. I believed him. Then came the kind of test life always saves for when you least expect it. A new development company filed plans for a luxury lakeside resort on the far side of the ridge. Their glossy brochures showed infinity pools and private docks, words like exclusivity and curated experience. Locals worried it'd poison the water again, both literally and metaphorically. This time, though, the town didn't panic. They organized. They cited the Evelyn Ordinance. They demanded transparency. They hired an environmental consultant, not a lawyer. And when the company balked, the county planning board, quoting our own language, denied the proposal. The lake had a guardian now, hundreds of them. When the news broke, I didn't celebrate. I just stood on the dock, hands in pockets, and watched the light ripple across the surface. Somewhere in that shimmer, I could almost hear Evelyn laugh. She used to tease me, "You can't fight every battle, Ray." "Maybe not," I'd said, "but I can build enough docks for the next guy to stand on." The next morning, Leo arrived early with paint on his shirt. "Thought the sign could use a touch-up," he said. He'd added one line beneath Evelyn's Marina, built on memory run on respect. The new line read, "And forever level." I couldn't have said it better myself. A year after the ordinance, Maple Harbor learned what calm weighs when you lift it together. The docks had the patina of places used well. Rope wore smooth where hands tied true knots. The footbridge thrummed a low content note whenever a day wind crossed it. If you listened close, you could hear what we'd built, not silence, steadiness. The morning that would tie the knot on everything began with a stubborn fog. It rolled off the lake like a promise, half kept softening the edges of boats and people. I brewed coffee in the Marina office and ran a rag over the brass nameplate from Evelyn's promise. It had lived on my desk for months now, not as an idol but as a compass. I liked how it caught the light even on gray days. Grief learns tricks like that when it wants to go on living. I had a list for the day: replace 3 cleats on the North Pier, check the bilge pump in. Slip 7, remind Hank his world's best grandpa banner was finally legal, he knew. He was just fishing for me to say it out loud. In the afternoon, we'd host Lake Logic's first graduation, a dockside ceremony for the kids who'd spent their summer sanding, tying, and listening to water teach them humility. 40 folding chairs, a potluck table made from 2 sawhorses and a door, a speaker that only crackled on certain vowels. Simple like everything honest. Eli arrived early with a box of program sheets and a grin that didn't ask permission. "Big day, Captain. We turn apprentices into trouble. Better trouble than idle," I said. Idle, rots, boats, and men. By 10, the fog thinned to gauze. Families trickled in, mothers in windbreakers, dads with thermoses, little kids who insisted the path was lava and could only be crossed by stepping on knots. Leo and Talia bounced between tasks with the proud anxiety of people who know the work's not real until the last chair is set. At noon, Rosa tapped the microphone and the speaker cleared its throat. "Welcome," she said to the first Lake Logic graduation. "No sponsors, no gold seals, no Latin, just skills that last longer than trends." The crowd laughed and eased. She introduced each student by what they'd built, not what they'd won: a repaired skeg, a recocked seam that didn't leak through 2 squalls, a splice so clean you couldn't tell where rope ended and patience began. When Leo's name was called, he didn't stride. He arrived. The kid had learned how to contain his own energy, which is rarer than talent. He took his certificate, shook hands, and accidentally smudged varnish on his shirt. Pride is messy. It ought to be. The program ended with a small surprise Talia had engineered. She tugged a tarp off a waist-high workbench to reveal a plaque walnut planed to satin letters burned neat as stitches: Evelyn's bench, for the hands that teach and the hands that learn. I swallowed hard enough to feel it touch my ribs. Talia's voice was steady. "We figured the Marina has a lot of places to work. It needed a place to remember why. People clap the way they clap for a truth that feels overdue." I rested my palm on the bench, and it came away warm with sun. The crowd drifted into a picnic. Kids dared each other to eat deviled eggs in 3s. Hank offered fishing tips to anyone not quick enough to dodge them. Doug explained to a stranger the difference between a lean and a lie, with what I can only describe as missionary zeal. The fog was gone. The lake wore clean blue. I could have ended the day right there and called it perfect. But stories that earn their endings give you one last test, not to break you, just to prove the weld. Mine arrived around 2, wearing an expensive polo and a smile that thought it could charm mold off pilings. He had a clipboard. He tried to keep low and a logo on his chest. I recognized the out-of-town consortium that had tried to buy my marina and then to sell the county a beautification district while counting on no one reading page 4. He'd brought a buddy, a drone operator with a camera the size of consequence. Afternoon, the polo said, giving the crowd a politician's wave, just capturing some B-roll for our Lakes of Tomorrow initiative, showcasing community engagement. "Great program you've got here." I stared at the logo, then at the drone, then at the word "our," floating like oil on water. "You have written permission to film on this property." His smile sharpened. "It's a public shoreline, sir." "Correct," I said. "The shoreline is public. The docks are not. This is private commercial property open by invitation. You don't have one." He shrugged to the drone guy. The camera lifted with the kind of whine mosquitoes make when they believe they're immortal. Eli was beside me before I asked. Rosa approached with her teacher's spine. A few parents edged closer, not aggressive present. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the ordinance, literally. Pulled a laminated copy of the Evelyn ordinance from the office and held it where the drone could see. Section 3. I read evenly prohibits private data collection on commercial waterfronts without consent where minors are present. That's us. Those are them. I pointed to the cluster of kids comparing rope burns like badges. Land your camera. The operator hovered between fear and arrogance, which is where men do their worst work. Polo tried a different angle. We're all on the same side, elevating the lake experience. I smiled without showing teeth. Son, the last folks who talked about elevating the lake tried to bulldoze its memory. Land it. The drone sagged downward, hit gently, complied. No shouting, no drama. Just gravity doing what gravity does. Polo signed the no filming acknowledgement with a pen that looked like it resented him. As he turned to go, he made one last mistake. He glanced at Leo's skiff, tied up proud at the education dock. Cute, he said. Campcraft. Leo didn't bristle. He smiled the way craftsmen smile at people who don't know what lasts. She rose straighter than your pitch deck, he said. The crowd laughed, not cruelly, just accurately. The men left. The day resumed the shape it had chosen before they arrived. After the tables were folded and the last cooler thumped into a truck bed, the light went gold enough to forgive. Leo ambled over with a bundle under his arm. He unwrapped a small brass-lettered plate, hand-etched, careful, imperfect in the way that confesses human hands. Thought you might want it on second wind, he said. She's taught me more than any boat I've known, and well, she's half yours anyhow. I ran my thumb over the letters. Second wind, Lake Logic, 01. Let's do it, I said. We drilled easy holes at the bow, bedded the screws in a whisper of sealant, and cinched her home. The plate took the last light of the day and returned it without apology. When dusk fell, the co-op gathered for one more small ceremony. No programs. Just a circle on the pier, shoulders touching because wood invites honesty. Rosa read a list, not of rules, but of habits we promised to keep. Post the records. Teach a knot before you teach a rule. Mend a board before you mail a letter. If a storm comes, hold lines and tongues. Doug added one that wasn't on the paper. If a clipboard shows up, smile and fetch the ordinance. Laughter. Agreement. Then they did something I didn't see coming. Eli cleared his throat and produced an envelope. Inside, an embossed card that made my hands feel too big. The co-op had voted quietly to name me Harbor Warden. It wasn't a title as much as a trust to keep the deck level, to hand the wheel when the next hands are ready, to remember that a marina is a school where the teachers wear calluses. I thought of Brenda and the way counterfeit authority sounds. Then I thought of Evelyn and what real stewardship feels like. I'll take it, I said. On one condition. Name it, Rosa said. That it passes with the tools. When I'm done, it goes to Leo or whoever's hands tell the truth. Leo froze like a deer in new light. Then he nodded, eyes bright with the terror that means yes. We closed the night with lanterns, low practical enough to see the next step, and not much more. I sat on Evelyn's bench and looked at the water that had broken and held me. Somewhere out past the last buoy, a fish rose and wrote a small circle on the surface. The lake keeps its archive, I thought. Make sure today is something it wants to save. A wind moved through the cedars, not a warning, a benediction. For the first time since the excavator's claw, I felt the story loosen from my ribs. It didn't leave, it settled. Stories do that when you finally hand them what they asked for: work law and a future with names you didn't know when it started. I stood, touched the nameplate once, and turned the office light off. The Marina hummed its low, faithful chord. Tomorrow would be lines and lists and somebody forgetting the right grit of sandpaper. It would be perfect.